Hello and welcome to another episode of the Therapist Connect podcast. My name is Dr. Peter Blundell and today I'm back interviewing therapists about their life and work. So the therapist I'm interviewing in this episode is Jeremy Sachs. Jeremy is a therapist from London but is now based in Glasgow. Since the 2010s, he's run services that support individuals living with trauma or marginalisation, helping them to connect and find community. In 2016, he focused on developing therapy services for men, boys and trans people who have survived sexual abuse and rape. He runs recovery groups and a private practice both online and in person, and he's on the board of trustees for Wellbeing Scotland and a lecturer at the NAOS Institute in London. Jeremy has a new book out called An Intersectional Guide for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse and Their Allies, Masculinity Reconnected, which is published by Routledge. And the book aims to examine male sexual abuse through three lenses: the impact of abuse at different developmental stages, intersectionality and transformative justice. So it's a really interesting conversation with Jeremy today, and I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I did recording it. So Jeremy, welcome to the Therapist Connect podcast, and thanks so much for giving up your time to come and chat to some of our listeners.
Oh, no, it's an absolute pleasure. As you said, we've sort of orbited each other, and it's really nice to have the luxury of sitting down and talking to you.
That's brilliant. So the question I ask everybody to start off with, and it kind of helps our listeners to get to know you a little bit if they haven't heard of you before. Can you tell us a little bit how you became a therapist in the first place and kind of what drew you to the profession?
Yeah, of course. If you sent the questions through and I was like, oh, I'll look at them and sort of get the answers, and I really stumbled on the first one. You know, I think there's such a temptation to look back and create a narrative about it because we're humans, right? We look for these patterns, but actually I really did stumble into the profession. So the choices were part accidental and part convenience and part necessity. I started life working on building sites in hard landscaping, and I did that for years. And I think that sort of early experience got me very interested in people, because one thing you do on building sites is you chat a lot of shit. And I was really aware there was some chat that I really enjoyed and some chat I was just bad at. I was a sort of young queer guy working on these sort of sites and paying attention, I suppose. What that does is you pay attention to other people and you pay attention to yourself in environments. So you go, well, why am I interested? Why can't I get in on this? But I can do this. And what about these other people? Why are they talking to you but not? So you sort of, I think in a roundabout way, it was quite informative. And while I was doing that, I was also working in the arts. So I'd go from building site to a theatre or to a gallery or something like that. And I did that for quite a few years and then transitioned to working in charities or health services. So I'd be running different, always groups, always sort of psychosocial groups. So I worked with families of men in Brixton prison who were being deported to either Nigeria or Jamaica. I ran the UK's only HIV-aware group for 10 to 12-year-olds and then an adolescent service for young people living with HIV. And then eventually ended up running the groups for a male sexual abuse charity. So we developed a group work program for men, for boys aged 13 and upwards, and trans non-binary people. And at that point, after doing this for a long time, so there's not a lot of career progression in the charity sector. Unfortunately, it is competitive and small, and so actually the only way to do the sorts of things I was doing, but I enjoyed the relational stuff, was to look for either sort of get a senior management position in third sector, which I didn't want, or you try to be a social worker, a psychotherapist, a counsellor. So it sort of felt like, okay, if I want to take this further, then that was the slightly obvious route for me at that point.
It sounds like you had a wealth of experience before you even went down that route of being a therapist.
A wealth of falling into different things and not really having. I think I had, the younger version of me, always had drive, but perhaps not a direction to drive toward, So absolutely building work in the arts takes some sort of drive, but also not having an end goal or a sense of place within either of these industries, within sort of running health services, going, okay, I'm enjoying this in the immediacy, but these are sectors where perhaps there isn't the progression and the safety that I wanted. So psychotherapy for now absolutely feels like the first job that's felt like a home for, yeah.
That's lovely. I was really struck by those two images of the building site and the arts, and really how different they seem to me. There's probably loads of stereotypes coming up for me as to what they look like, but it sounds like you felt like a bit of a, I don't know, distance between those two roles.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something, isn't there? And there's probably much earlier experiences I would have had of this, sort of families, immigrant backgrounds, and this idea of place and how you see yourself in place and how you see others in the place you are and how comfortable you are or how you might need to take on different adaptations in order to find that. So, and this can always sound very dramatic, but I think some of it happens on such a subtle and unconscious level. But it was good groundwork, I think. Before I even knew what psychotherapy was, I think there was already a sense of going, what am I and what does this mean? And what is this and what am I to it? And all of these really important relational questions that we ask ourselves in group or in one-to-one therapy.
That's really interesting. So you told us a little bit about your career before being a therapist, but can you tell us a little bit about your career kind of after you qualified or whilst you were training?
Yeah, of course. So group work was sort of my first love in psychotherapy, and I still really value group work. And I suppose I want to be, it always gets called group therapy. I think if you were Puritan, you would not call it group therapy. I think my model is an integrative model that provides space for the sort of deep processing that perhaps pure group psychotherapy would provide. But it also has psychoeducation. It also has psychosocial elements to it. So there's quiche and tea and frisbee, this sort of thing. Allow and play, all of these really important things. So that's always been my first love. And for one-to-one therapy, I sort of see myself as a really, hopefully, and I increasingly at this minute sort of shift towards this more and more relational, more and more person-centered. It is nested firmly in psychodynamic understanding, in theory, but all of that happens outside of the therapy room and in the therapy room. I think it is a relational reparative experience that I really think is important. And that can include thinking about transference, counter-transference is so important to me. It's such a clue, into what's happening. So that's sort of the bedrock. I have additional training in narrative exposure therapy, which is a short-term therapeutic intervention for traumatic stress disorders. And, it's a bit like EMDR. It's something that you can go and do quite divorced of anything. And I now don't use it as a single course of therapy. I'll incorporate it into the relational therapy. So I think that's sort of the hopefully it gives you a sense of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, it does. And so where do you work then as a therapist? Are you in private practice or have you worked in other organisations?
Yeah, at the minute I'm in private practice. So I'm based in Glasgow and I have a private practice both in person and online. I've worked in the charity sector and while training was at NHS services for Maudsley in South London. But yeah, at the minute, purely private practice. I took some time off. I sort of went down to part-time private practice in order to write a book, through that very smooth transition to talk about that. And so yeah, at the minute, the time split between writing and private practice.
That's brilliant. So my next question is obviously going to be, can you tell us a little bit about the book? I see.
Thank you. It's almost like we had a discussion, but prompt me to do it. Yeah, so the book is the title is An Intersectional Guide for Male Survivors of sexual abuse and their allies. And hopefully the title is a good enough explanation to what it is. It is a book that examines the different challenges that male survivors of sexual abuse face, and it hopefully provides guidance for them as well as people who want to support them. So this could be psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, but it could also be loved ones, family members, husbands, wives who are supporting the book. I hope. There's not a lot of books on male survivors. There are good ones. There's Victims No Longer, which is a Mike Liu book, but that was written in the 70s. So I hope what this book brings, there's 3 different elements that I sort of need to practice talking about in order to promote it. But I think it aims to look at abuse experienced at different developmental stages. So childhood, adulthood, and adolescence. I think teenagers are often neglected in lots of, even in sort of physical health. Paediatrics goes from child to adult, and we miss this really informative, essential developmental stage of adolescence. And abuse in adolescence, particularly for boys, is wildly confusing, disorientating, and isolating. That's one of the elements. It talks about the intersectional element as well. There are very few books that examine what it is, the experience of sexual abuse for different types of men. And when I think about that, I think about men's lives before abuse, during abuse, and after abuse. So what is it to grow up in poverty and then experience sexual abuse and then have to seek support for something that is stigmatizing and shaming? What is it if you're a teenage boy? What is the sense of adultification, particularly if you are a working class or black boy and experiencing sexually, all of these different variables that impact your ability to either heal from sexual abuse or compounds trauma. Importantly, it's not about saying there's a hierarchy of suffering. It's not one's worse than another. It just says, hey, look, different experiences, different identities will require different considerations when healing. And some people will struggle to find support more than others. And then the third aspect of it is a transformative justice approach, which is an ideology which concerns itself around violence in society. So I often say, for men, sexual abuse rarely happens in a vacuum. Transformative justice would say violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. So it concerns itself with, yes, sexual abuse, but also, climate justice, land ownership, domestic abuse, sex workers' rights, minority trauma, generation trauma, these kinds of things. Accountability is a big part of it. And it's rare that it's used in the context of men because of the patriarchy and where it sits. But actually what we do know is that men who want to move on with their lives may look to statutory services in order to help them. Now, this can be the healthcare service or this can be the criminal justice system. And depending on your identity, you will have a different relationship with these different statutory services. And actually, even if you're a man who is not part of a minority, the way the criminal justice system mishandles evidence or stigmatizes what it is to be a man and a survivor of sexual abuse, you may not find what you need from these statutory services. So it offers transformative justice principles as a suggestion of how to heal and move on outside of systems that may neglect you or at worst re-traumatize you. So that's sort of the book in a nutshell. The subject matter is chosen by the men who I've worked with in groups. So each chapter reflects one of the key topics that male survivors are concerned with. And it's after working with hundreds of men, it's really amazing how the same topics come up each group. So, okay, here we are again. This is a big topic. Sex and relationships, shame, coping strategies, good. These things come up again and again. So hopefully that's concise.
Absolutely. It sounds a wonderful book, and it sounds like there's so much in there. And I was wondering why you think, I possibly know what I think, but wondering why you think it's taken so long for kind of a book like this to kind of be be published? It sounds like there is some good books out there, but there's not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, women's experience of sexual violence is talked about a lot more because women face it a lot more. Women face a version of sexual violence on a daily basis. How impactful it is, it's very an individualistic sort of question, but living in a patriarchal society, and so a lot of conversation and resources go towards that, and rightly so. You know, I think there can be a really uncomfortable narrative of us versus them, and this doesn't get us anywhere. The reason why we are talking about men more these days is because of the work of feminist scholars and activists. You know, it's not in spite of, it's because of it. I think men have had to adapt to the patriarchy in ways in order to reduce how harmful the patriarchy is to men. And this is a systematic shutting down of emotions and feelings, which is pretty futile. I don't want to belittle it, but it's, if you push emotion down and emotion down here, it will come out somewhere else. But in order to fit into the patriarchy, I think men do shut down these kinds of things. I think systems of power, so religious organizations, schools, settings where male survivors are disproportionately represented, they have incredible power still in this world. And all of this contributes to a systemic silencing of men. You know, the group I used to run, the average time it took for a male survivor to tell anybody about abuse was 26 years. You know, so 26 years before, if telling somebody at all. And then the topic really unfolds because then there's different stigmas about abuse at different ages. If you're abused as an adult versus a child, if you're abused by a woman, what is it to be a trans man who's abused and had to transition, and where does the abuse sit with this, and where does your gender sit with this? So it's a really rich tapestry of incredibly silencing and oppressive experiences. That means we don't have as many resources for men because it's hard for men to talk about.
And just in those discussion points, I just think the complexity of all of that, it sounds like this book really tries to kind of get into the nuance of that and trying to understand how that might be experienced differently by different men.
Absolutely. I really hope so. It really strives to, I say in the introduction, you know, one of the things that I think the psychological industries perhaps have misunderstood is that psychotherapy is framed as a return to safety. So we experience mental distress, we go to therapy, we find ways of understanding it, and we can return to a place of relative safety. For so many people, they were born into danger. They were born into either relational, familial danger, systemic danger. You know, for some people will have never known safety before the experience of sexual abuse. So actually, when we are thinking about how to work with this experience, understanding that often, yes, there is a traumatic experience of sexual abuse, and whether that happens as a one-time thing or systematically across a period in a man's life. And often for men, it happens multiple times with multiple perpetrators in multiple developmental stages. But even before that, something might have happened that we see presenting in our patients or clients that you go, what is this? I don't love diagnostic language, but what is this sort of disorder that maybe led to you being vulnerable for people to say, I can prey on this child or this teenager or this adult is vulnerable in some way. So yeah, hopefully it sort of opens up that conversation to go, you know, the circumstances before, during, after, the identity of somebody. These things really matter when we think about how to work with our survivors.
And what coming up for me, I was thinking about people's experience before the abuse, the experience of the abuse, and also not all psychotherapy is safe. actually. And so there's potentially re-traumatization, but also other harmful experience that is happening in therapy on top of all of that potentially.
Oh, I completely agree. And it's complicated because nobody says I'm a bad therapist. No one puts their hands up to say that. And I've heard countless stories from men who will say my last therapist, and it can be from really harmful, made me disclose something I wasn't ready. They said to heal, I need to tell my trauma story, right the way to people shrugging off, going, well, my therapist didn't really believe in bisexuality, so this kind of thing. And I want to say, and I think this is perhaps the grey area in what you're getting at, I have been the wrong therapist for some people. Some people will have walked away from therapy with me, not a lot, like I get, one or two examples I can think of, who will absolutely have gone, gosh, that was a negative experience. And I can be as holding and as empathetic and as safe as I can possibly be, and that still be too much. There'd be something in the transference, or I can make a mistake, or that is taken so, there's a sort of a narcissistic or borderline wound that I, as a human being, has rocked so much that they would walk away and go, okay, that did not do me any good. So I think there's need humility when talking about it, and also understanding that traditionally the psychological industries have done harm particularly to minoritized people, but for sexual abuse, absolutely.
I think one of the difficulties that we have as a profession, I think, is that many people are reluctant to talk about those times when they've made a mistake, or a client may have had a harmful experience, but actually we're not willing to admit that, or we're not willing to acknowledge it on some level because we're feeling defensive and not wanting to admit our errors and our mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. I really do. I think maybe we'll get onto this in a bit, but I think particularly in psychotherapy and counselling, in the UK, certainly it is a strange and difficult industry to navigate, the way it is viewed by other healthcare systems, the way we view ourselves, or we view our cousins and siblings in different psychological services. I really understand why people are defensive. I really get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this might link into this next question then, which I'll move on to just to skip a question and come back because I think it might interlink into this. So what do you think is the biggest challenge the counselling and psychotherapy professionals face?
It's such an interesting question. I'm going to also refuse the premise because you need someone smarter than me to say the biggest challenge. I think one that I think about a lot, this is just occurs to me an awful lot. I think psychotherapy is changing so quickly, and it's a response to the world around us, right? We shut the door on our therapy room, and it's harder and harder these days to stop the outside world coming in to our client work. And some of this I want to celebrate. I'm glad gone are the days where we are expected to be a blank slate. I say that I do think there's a place for sort of analysts and this. I think this is such a fascinating field. I'm glad I don't have to do it. I think it's very difficult to be a blank slate. I think it's very difficult to be anti-oppressive and be a blank slate. I think it's very difficult to have a relational style of person-centered therapy and be this blank slate. And I also think there's a climate at the minute where there's a richness of misinformation about what psychotherapy is that really, I think, alarms me. And I'll try and be very concise because I know I can talk about this endlessly. But I think it sort of splits into a bit. I think social media, I remember when training, the question was about what clients could or couldn't find out about you. That question feels so obsolete. Because I think, social media has become so much more than that. I see therapists volunteering information on social media, and some of this is great discourse, really interesting, really great. And some of it, I think, is deeply problematic. I think I see TikToks. So I have a TikTok account. It is purely for cute cats raccoons getting up to mischief and dancing. But I'll have psychotherapists come across and it'll be 5 signs your childhood trauma is affecting your relationships, or how to tell when you're dating a narcissist. And I find this problematic in so many ways, almost beyond whether the information is correct or not. I think there's something about the expectations we're setting for the general public in what psychotherapy is. I think it sets us up as being the exceptional, that we're somehow sort of these exceptional people who are there to treat the affect. We're here for symptom reduction. And actually, that's not what psychotherapy is. I think if we set ourselves up as sort of these people who can talk on social media and have our YouTube channels and our TikToks, I think it really diminishes what therapy is. It says that we're the primary in the process, rather than the process is the primary function, and we're there as a relational, curious guide. And, I don't want to shit on people who sort of have social media. These are individuals. There's a systematic issue. There's the apps that treat therapists like dating apps. I won't name them, but, they promise to provide help in a better way. And it's sort of like, swipe left if you don't want that therapist. Well, what does that do to rupture? How do we heal? Absolutely, you have the right to change your therapist, but how do we sit with rupture in the room? And, if you download an app and it's free to use until you're paying a therapist, if it's free to use, you're the product. The shareholders in Silicon Valley, they don't care about your mental health. They care about your data and this sort of thing. And, they say have 24-hour access to your therapist, have a phone call. And this isn't psychotherapy, And even so, a guilty pleasure, Married at First Sight is and they have a panel of experts. One of them is a BACP member, and they'll be saying, you are this attachment style. This is a classic definition. And 1, I don't know how anybody says that to anybody. 2, the example I'm thinking of, they were wrong. That's not what this attachment. So I just think there's so much misinformation. And I think it is a problem because we can be really in a sort of unhealthy competitiveness, because us as an industry is sort of perhaps diluted by the way healthcare is viewed in the UK, mental health is viewed in the UK. You look for jobs for therapists, and it's counselling psychologists, it's clinical psychologists, and it's CBT therapists, and these are the NHS jobs. So suddenly we're all really struggling to go, oh no, I know what I'm talking about. Look at this. And I don't know I don't know how to solve this, because actually I think there is use in this. There is use in the work you do through social media and connection. And I think people have the right to gain information and psychoeducation. But I do despair sometimes. I hope that makes sense.
It really does make sense. And a lot of that resonates with me. And I was thinking about, as a person-centered therapist, I'm trying constantly not to be the expert in the relationship with the client. And I was thinking a lot of what you were talking about there was people trying to be experts and kind of look like they know what they're talking about, and not always drawing off information that is accurate or relevant, or they're not experts in that particular field or area.
I think you're absolutely right. I think whenever I'm reaching for psychoeducation, something's going wrong in the relationship. Somebody's making me feel like I need to prove myself. It's some sort of, it could be sort of, again, some sort of narcissistic adaptation. And I'm going, gosh, I'm not good at it. I better say the same. And also, what we're not, these clinical psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, which I think is wonderfully freeing. I don't need to worry. In my supervision and in my private time when I'm reflecting on my clinical work, sure, I will use different models to understand individuals. But how freeing is it to sit in a room and go, you are in pain and I really want to understand that. And maybe we can find some patterns that might make sense of something. But actually, my primary goal here is for you to feel really heard. And I will draw on my experience and my expertise and all of this clinical knowledge to go, what is going to be the best for you in an authentic way? Because what will work for you might not work for others. But you know, to be unshackled from a clinical model and yet draw on it, because those clinical models are data-driven. We have research into them. We know we can fall back on it. But the freedom to go, actually, sure, this is a DSM definition of trauma, but fuck that. What does this mean to you? Love more. Love.
I love that. And if that is what psychotherapy is about, then when you see those people on TV shows making diagnoses or even commenting on other people's mental health or ways of being as therapists, I suppose that's something that really grates on me as well, in terms of, because if that's not necessarily what we're doing in the therapy room, why all of a sudden is it then okay to kind of be going doing that else?
It's because there's this third person in the room. And a third person is either the audience, the producers, the investors. There's this third person that's going, okay, this sort of spectre of person. Of course, we work with third people in the room all the time. They're the abusive fathers. They're the difficult relationships. They're the people that inform us in good and bad ways. And what we get to do is name it, you know, sort of conceptualize them. But these therapists who are on these TV shows saying that there's a real dishonesty. There's a real doubt. I'm going to say this thing to you and it's for your own good. But there's this spectre person going, actually, here's an alternative motive because we want views. Yeah. Or you're going to go onto TikTok and say, I'm going to provide you with psychoeducation because I want to help. But what's the shadow side of that? What do you need? What's the third drive in the run?
And I think what we kind of suspect, but maybe what we don't fully know, is how all of that is now going to impact on all these different therapeutic relationships out there, because things have shifted so much now that even before, when you were saying psychotherapy, I was thinking actually we could debate as to what that actually is, because is everybody doing the same thing actually, or actually people doing very different things?
Absolutely. And the real, you know, while we're all sort of scratching our chins about this, there are people out there trying to make sense of it. There are clients and patients going, well, but you do that and you do that, and this is DBT, but that sounds like CBT, but you have a video that says that, and they're coming to us with all of those, and that will manifest in lots of different ways. And I think it really, you know, I think it ties us in knots, and I think that it is deeply detrimental to people who are looking for support.
This question, maybe you kind of answered this question, because what we've been talking about, I suppose, social media therapy community. So I wondered, how do you see the wider therapy community? So that might be the social media community, but elsewhere as well. And then how connected do you feel with those other therapists?
Yeah, so I mean, it would be no surprise after ranting about social media that actually I don't find it very connected for me. And I used to try, you know, I used to sort of see how effective it was for other people in really finding their people. And it's sort of, you know, that marketing 101, social media has to be social. And what I very recently discovered is I don't find it doesn't give me the nutrition that you know, connection does. And I think it does for other people, and that's fine. And you know, what I needed to do was unhook from seeing people who could really find their people with it and go, do you know, okay, that's because I put stuff out and nobody likes it. You know, it's seductive. And I don't, if I can't receive satisfaction from it, I'm certainly not going to be able to give that satisfaction. And so it leaves me at best a bit sort of meh. And then at worst, when I am feeling a bit like, hey, God, I could really do with a win, it's pretty punishing. So how do I find connection? I mean, we all work in silos, particularly in private practice. I have a peer supervisor who is, I think has been a lovely sort of recent development, who is a therapist who is a very different type of therapist to me. And I really value the differences that we bring. So we meet monthly. I'm lucky that in my personal life, actually, I know therapists, and they are different types of therapists. So I sort of grew up with an old friend. We used to hang around the same places in South London, and she became a therapist a few years before me. And so, so there's little dots of connections in my personal life. But other than that, I do find it difficult. I do, because I think if you work in one area, so men and sexual abuse, you get therapists contacting you going, I'd like to talk through a case. I really value that. I get a lot from that, but it's very sporadic. So I think it can be lonely. It can be quite disconnected, which I do sort of miss the nutrition that you get from connectivity.
I think that's interesting to hear that. And I think a lot of the people we had on the podcast who are in private practice have also felt that. But I was also interested in your perspective in terms of social media possibly making you feel disconnected rather than connected. And I was thinking, being involved with Therapist Connect and seeing how it's evolved, and actually sometimes it might appear that there's lots of connection going on, but actually maybe people aren't necessarily feeling that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So, and we don't have to go into this too much, but my disposition or my internal script is to feel othered very easily. Not unique to me at all. But I will view all of it through that lens first before I have to go, hold on, what's really happening here? So there's a real reflex for me, certainly, to go, well, I don't belong. I can't do this. I don't feel connected. Yeah. And I think therapists, we're all, or not all of us, maybe I shouldn't speak so universally, but a lot of us carry some sort of relational wound that will either make us want to really pull close or feel completely isolated from, there's sort of, we vibrate certain frequencies. So yeah, I think it is really interesting, the appearance of connectivity and how we go, I can feel in the middle of this, or I can feel on the fringes, or I can feel pushed out. It's super interesting when we apply this relational language to something ethereal, like Therapist Connect, right? You could look up that hashtag and go, look at this hub of creativity, and I didn't, and have your own sort of relational response to it, which is, we weren't talking about this 120 years ago when Freud was.
Absolutely. And then the impact of that on each of us will obviously be very, very different. And then the unpacking of that as well, in terms of how we make sense of it and understand it. I think that's really difficult. So we're just coming to the end now, but just like my final question is, what are your future plans like coming up? Obviously, you've got the book.
Okay. So future plans, I'm developing a 4-session training CBT on working with male survivors. At the minute, there's a sort of psychosocial context session. There is the impact of sexual abuse on different developmental stages through the lens of the sexual self and shame. Then there is one on narcissistic adaptations and working with that. And then there's a 4th one. I haven't quite decided what that's going to be. I think maybe something around systemic personal, interpersonal betrayal and what that means. But that's coming up in the next few months, which I'll be putting out there on social media. And then the book launches, there's a London date, which is the 23rd of August, which is a Saturday at the Freud Museum. And then there's an online book launch, which is hosted by the Therapy and Social Change Network on the 19th of September. There'll be hopefully some Scottish launches too, but that's all up in the air. So that's the immediate future, I think.
I think that's enough to be going on with, isn't it? There's quite a lot to pack in over the next few months.
Yes.
That is fantastic. Jeremy, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you, and best of luck with the book. I'll be buying a copy, and we'll make sure that we can put all the links in the show notes and everything so people can be directed to your training and to the book. And yeah, hopefully we can connect again and have a good conversation sometime.
I'd really like that. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I was nervous, if I'm honest.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take